It's a pleasant experience to welcome my good old pal, Demetrios or James Bouryiotis. He writes very unconventional stuff, including fiction and nonfiction. So he informed me of an essay that he wrote 4 years ago, but he revised this year. It's titled Theorizing Power, Not Violent Contra Violent Power. Welcome to the show once again, James. How are you?
Good, Chung. Thanks for reading the essay and introducing it like you did, because yeah, it's a few years old. And then when the Charlie Kirk killing happened, and all of a sudden this whole thing about violence, words are violence, kind of came up as a topic again. People challenging that, whereas it was unchallenged for so long. I remembered the essay because that was kind of the position I took. I didn't really take it strategically. It just so happened because it was part of a grad course, and the course was actually on the Troubles in Ireland, kind of the whole history of the Troubles, and from an arts perspective. But of course, it dealt with violence, and so I kind of took my interest in power and then brought in the violent thing and developed this idea about needing to separate violent power from what I called nonviolent power, um, which is really most of power. And and really, when Foucault talks about power, they're really talking about nonviolent power, and often calling it systemic power and a number of other ways. And then over time, it kind of just drew. It got equated with violence, as you know. And so I tried to pare things back, peel it back, take it back to um, before that happened. And so I want to say that we need to theorize nonviolent power. I can explain a bit about the term in a minute if you want, and to uh, to clarify. What am I saying here? It's to clarify this whole issue of nonviolent power and to more fully theorize power without the violence baggage.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, what prompted your thinking when you read about the whole Charlie Kirk thing?
Well, yeah, just because I mean that was a significant event, partly because it was caught live. There was like 3,000 people watching, and it was clearly seen. I mean, you could just watch it. This guy gets shot on video like that, and so it was a pretty drastic event. And and then when they found out, of course, the shooter was acting against someone just I've because ideologically, and there's really no evidence that Charlie Kirk was violent or advocated physical violence or was physically violent. And so then, I guess outrage from the right saying, look, we've had enough of this rhetoric. Look what it's resulted in. All of this, you know, silent, whatever you want to say, words are violence, silence is violence. Everything was violence for a while there, according to progressive activist thought. And and I had talked about that in the essay, you know, not really thinking about it as a topical to the whole debate that was out there in society. People saying words are violent. I just really did it because I was looking at my ideas about power.
Yeah, certainly. Okay. Yeah, so how do you observe the way power exerts itself in a nonviolent manner?
Right, right. So maybe the first thing we talk a little bit about this nonviolent thing. Okay, so just to I have this kind of wonky title to the essay, this not violent, Because when I did the essay, my prof, and of course, it's a grad course, and you're supposed to do things properly according to proper academic. I don't know. He claims that I couldn't define a term in a negative. If that was my main investigation or starting investigation, the essay, that I couldn't call it nonviolence. I don't know. I didn't have a problem with it, but he pointed that out. I don't know. So I ended up sort of trying to play around with that a bit, and I thought, okay, so it's not violent. I'm not going to call it nonviolence, which also does have some baggage in terms of the whole peace movement and going back to Gandhi. I ended up with this sort of thing, and I changed the beginning of the essay, the little beginning part, to kind of try to accommodate this idea. So if I've made some sort of error there in trying to put forward a term that is defined in negative, well, okay, that's what that is. Um, so I kind of played. I sort of say, oh, it's not violent, and then I played around. Eventually, just lapse back to calling it nonviolent because it's just easier. So you're asking,
Yeah.
what were you
So
asking?
what is not violent power?
Right. So I was just reading through the essay, and I said it a little earlier, but I didn't really say in the essay, but really, not violent power is really power, and then you have violent power, or power that is violent. But all of that, biopower and everything that came to the fore from Foucault and all those other theorists and things everybody was talking about was really not violent power. And then eventually it glommed. It got all this baggage about silence is violence, words are violence, that's violence, and all those things were really not violent things. So I tried to, as I say, dial it back and go, look at what we really need to do is we really need to fully theorize this not violent power so that we don't have to be susceptible to gravitating to theories of violent power. Because violent power is really easy to theorize or define. It's physical force or the credible threat of it. And so that was sort of my motivation there.
Yeah. Of course, the problem that you've addressed in the essay is how do we define violence to begin with? So you've gone through all of these thinkers who are associated with the New Left, Chomsky, Zizek, and Foucault, and
Right.
they define violence or force or coercion in various ways, but all of it do not really involve force in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, how would you offer up a definition of violence?
Of violence? Well, I went right back to the dictionary definition, and I found quotes where people were saying, well, we used to call it used to be, physical force. Someone punches you in the head, that's violence. And now all these other terms are coming in. And so I found some sources of that. And then I was looking into Zizek's book. What is that book? It's Violence. Yeah,
Violence. Yeah,
yeah, it's
convenient
called
title.
Violence. Yeah. So I think there's a series. Someone has, maybe some publisher sponsors a series of somewhat little books about various times. I'm not sure. So he did this one of violence, but I mean, he just jumps into this rhetorical hoops, and it's just, I mean, he really takes theory and, as the French brought it to us with all of their fancy and I think romantic, literary even style, and really ups the ante. I mean, he's jumping somersaults verbally to in this case define this kind of power that we're talking about now as violence, and state, the underpinning capitalism, this coercive force of violence, whatever, without really, without saying that, okay, that is actual violence. He's clearly, he wants to write a whole book and he wants to be fancy. I mean, Zizek is not a bleeding heart leftist type philosopher. in my view. I don't think. I mean, he's not. I don't know if he's a Marxist. I don't. I find his stuff. I can't read it. So I may not even disagree with him politically. Let's just put it that way. But I find his approach just sort of intolerable, and I'm getting off track. So I found these examples that I said, well, that makes these people are being, it's problematic the way these people are defining violence now. And again, then I went back to my fallback, which was this because we don't have a really fully theorized idea of power or theory of power, aka non-violent or not violent power. And that's because in violent power, of course, you know what the force is. You know exactly what it is. It's physical violence, physical, or a threat that makes you fear for it. And that's how it works. So then I go, well, but really most of power isn't that, but no one's really saying how it works. Like what actually happens? You know, if you say, I'm going to punch you in the head if you don't, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And we know why, because you're going to punch me in the head, and that's bad. I don't want to get punched in the head. But with the other power, how does it work? And there's so much discourse about this power, and I feel that it doesn't, they never really get down to saying that kind, they don't have an equation to physical violence, how it works. Well, then what is the thing that makes this other power work?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Obviously, I have like my issues with both Zizek, Foucault, and Chomsky. But
Right.
there's a fun fact. I actually met Chomsky on this podcast, so
Yeah, I listened
we
to it.
we have a pretty good conversation, I'll say. But nevertheless, all of them
Yeah,
are
no, it was great.
programs.
It was
Yeah,
great.
I'm glad to have been able to have the opportunity.
Sure. And he's, his mental prowess is still there. He's
Anyway.
ancient, but it's clearly all there. But um, now this thing, I did do some looking at Chomsky, because I haven't read all his works, but I've read enough of them. And I mean, you start looking at him, he kind of, just to put it simply, says the same. He says, forcing whatever it might start or what brought him into a career. So, so he does that, and he doesn't hold back. This guy is worse than he was, personally, what do you call it, signing off on drone hits, etc. So, so Chomsky says that he has no, he uses accusations of physical violence a lot against, and then he starts talking about kind of the information war, the manufacture of consent. And what you get from that, or what I get from that, is when it comes down to it, is information. He seems to be saying that they're controlling the information that the public gets, the citizen gets, and that's how they control the citizen. Now, I find that kind of limited. I'm drawing a line. I'm saying, wait a minute. I don't think it's that easy. You don't just control information, although it's important. It's very important. But you don't just say, okay, da da da. Oh, all right. And people completely line up or conform. I think there's something more. And then as I was reading more of Chomsky, I started reading between the lines, and he's making all of these other references and allusions to religion and all these sort of religious narratives. Of course, he's not religious at all. And I'm thinking, why is he doing that? And just to make sort of the whole thing short, I feel like Chomsky's got his on the tip of his tongue, so to speak, an idea of how this power really is working, not violent power, but he just can't get his brain out of his whole shtick of the state is violent. is they're controlling the information, and then the people are controlled. And I just, for some reason, he just won't make that little thing and look at what his own analysis, his own sort of writings are indicating might be a real avenue of pursuit. Okay, so yeah, where are we at now?
Yeah, the what I find to be quite um hilarious or ironic, at least on Chomsky's part, is that his whole idea of manufacturing consent, as in, the media is deceiving the people, is now being most embraced by the people that he dislikes the most, which is the right. There's more, the right in Western nations that are skeptical of the media, whereas the left is more or less, supportive of it.
Yeah, it didn't used to be that way.
Hmm.
I think it was
Okay.
the other way around before.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, he got that whole manufacturer consent from that really hyper enthusiastic advertising exec in the early, I don't know if it was the 1920s, but this guy, one of these real zealots about pro, American systems of control. That we can do this, we can do this, whatever, and we can So that manufactured consent. That's where Chomsky got it from. I don't know. I can't remember the guy's name. Um, so that guy was, someone who you would call a right wing guy. He was a business guy and in advertising, and so what he was saying that they were doing was a good thing. Chomsky took a skeptical view, but said, "Look, that guy, what he's saying is right, but that's not good." So yeah, he was critical of, as you're saying, media, but we're in a situation now where a lot of the media has gone over to other types of narratives, not those other grand narratives of the American golden era of American capitalism. So yeah, that is kind of interesting because, of course, like the CBC in Canada, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, um, they published Chomsky, and I think that manufacturing consent. I
Yeah,
think it was a
the
whole series.
Massey lectures, right?
Yeah,
Massey
so he
lectures.
did Massey lectures, and I think they had a whole series because I remember you used to be able to get at the library, and there was like a whole kind of a set or something of, I can't even remember now if they were CDs or DVDs, but it was a big thing, and
Yeah.
because they thought he was critiquing the right.
Mhm.
Well, now they are the right, so to speak. They control the media.
Right. Yeah. I think it was for his Necessary Illusions um,
Okay.
series of lectures. I think it was
Oh,
published into a book or something. And yeah, what
yeah.
that's another irony too, right? Chomsky was critiquing the same thing that I think the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is doing, which is, sifting through information through, various channels,
Yeah, absolutely. I
for the
mean, they
public.
are deeply, I mean, they're funded by the state. I mean, they don't even really even have to go any further. It's state funded, aka controlled media. That's what it is. I mean, how much more, and yet they act as if not only are they neutral, but they are impartial, and they are, of course, good. And of course, it's all the, specifically the Liberal Party of Canada narrative. Specifically, that is what is their whole raison d'etre. It's what informs everything and how they think. And anyway, yeah,
Right.
funny.
Um, One thing about, I think, Chomsky is, well, at least it's a grade better than, I suppose, Foucault or Zizek, is that you know where Chomsky stands on things. He's a little bit monomaniacal on that.
Right.
So you know where he stands, and you know how to refute him. But when it comes to like Zizek and Foucault, their language is so evasive that, once you pin down this one thing that you
Yeah.
presume that they stand on, they just
Mhm.
evade you. I
Right.
think that was the that was made famous by I watched that debate where Chomsky did with Foucault back in the day,
Yeah,
where something about like the moral objectivity, whether there's anything that's objective to be
right.
known.
Well, whether there's any essence, any human
Oh yes,
essence, or
yes,
there's only, yeah,
right. What's funny in that debate is that Foucault refused to even engage with Chomsky in English. Chomsky was speaking English and Foucault was speaking French.
right.
And I remember like Chomsky got a really bad impression about it. It says that was like he was like this thoroughly amoral man,
Oh,
Chomsky said.
oh yeah,
And
yeah.
of course,
I've seen it. Yeah,
yeah, of
and
course, there's this debate with Zizek and Jordan Peterson, which
right.
took place in your home country of Canada. Although technically Peterson did not, make himself very, how you call it, clear. Like one thing that Peterson kind of lacks is clarity. But when it comes to Zizek, you don't even think that by the end of the debate, you really question whether he really stands for Marxism.
Yeah, yeah. I would agree with that, and I think you're right. I think this whole sort of deflection and play and not having a single position is it's partly strategy, but it's partly because they, of course, reject again the whole grand narrative. The West in general, they're critiquing the West, so therefore they have to critique that kind of tradition, stability, the God idea, everything, and then it sort of comes into this. Well, I'm going to deflect, and Foucault is like, "Well, you asked me a question, I'm going to ask you a question," and yeah, and at the end of the day, I find it a little insubstantial. And what do you get out of this play? And as you get freedom out of this, I'm not so sure. Um, uh, yeah, yeah, because Foucault, of course, he claimed he flirted with Marxism and rejected it, so he wasn't a Marxist actually, according to him. And um, and then at the very end of his life, all of a sudden, it was all about the care of the self, and he became this uber humanist or something, according to how they market him. At the end, I've looked at those lectures and things, and
Yeah.
I don't know Foucault, and then on all the material they publish, and you're looking, and there's like they're like lecture notes and stuff, and they're in they're marketed and promoted as very serious sources of wisdom, and I don't know, and he's just anyway. I shouldn't get into this more. He seems to be he's just riffing. I don't know. So um, so then I started trying to in this essay trying to say, okay, then what is this theorization of not violent power, which is really just power. Now I realize is really what I was trying to say, and so I proceeded on from there. Um, I think the essay is fairly cogent. It's I'd have to spend a lot more time to really get anywhere, and I wasn't really happy with the. I included this Rudolf Otto, the German theo, I guess the theologist, let's call him, and I don't know. I didn't feel I explained it really well. I was trying to condense a lot of information, but I think he's a very important um, philosopher, and I found it really like it just jived. I was like, oh, kind of things I've been thinking of is he's talking about right there with his ideas of the diminution of the self in the face of the holy, an encounter with the holy, you know, is a genuine one, if there is that anymore, what the response would be. And, I mean, I think he's really profoundly invested in his material. And then it just, in a way, this kind of scholarship, we were talking with Foucault and Zizek, where it's just this terminology and rhetorical exercises. And then you go back to, and Rudolf Otto was in the early part of the 20th century. And I don't know, I just find this so much more invested in a search for the truth or the truth, which you have to put scare quotes around it, and that's part of the problem is once they rejected any of this kind of idea of a greater or cohesifying or unifying idea of truth or then what do you have? You've got
Yeah.
this silly little play of surfaces, and I was thinking about when I watched, we were talking about the Jean-Luc Godard film, The Band of Outsiders, and first I was a little bit, okay, here's, Godard, and it's all sort of silly, but really, you can look at these postmodern strategies as play, I think as long as you're not rejecting and sort of sneering at all the grand narratives, maybe mocking, having a little fun. I mean, that's fine. I think that's good. Um, so
Mhm.
anyway, what
Yeah.
else?
Yeah. I suppose both Zizek and Foucault were influenced, obviously, by Jacques Derrida, this master of not making sense and everything. He spent obviously his entire career rebelling against what he called, what is it, logocentrism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Logocentrism basically just means that words have meaning. The idea that words have meaning is something that Jacques Derrida was rebelling against.
Right.
But when when people who do not, you know, how you call it, inscribe any significance to the idea that words have meaning,
Yes.
they seem to really emphasize the idea that words are violent, which is contradictory, right?
Oh,
Because to
right.
for something
Oh, interesting.
to be impactful in a way that you call it
Yeah.
violent, it has to mean that it has meaning in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Right. So by trying to reject this whole idea of words having meaning or stable meanings, then they are kind of succumbing to it more because then they're very suspicious. Now, I was reading some Nietzsche recently. I read The Antichrist, or reread it, and there was some appendices in this edition, and it was talking about that really Nietzsche started this whole thing about words really don't mean anything, uh, according to this appendices. And I was sort of a little bit shocked. I also Another one of them said he was a very invested materialist, which also kind of shocked me. Um, and But however it was, if it was Nietzsche that kind of put that suspicion in motion, then and as you're pointing out, people then attributed more power to words at the same time they've said or after they've said they have no meaning. And they entitled themselves to play with words fully, of course, whether it's Roland Barthes or Derrida or right, they could fully play with them, Zizek, but somehow for other people, they were very bad things that we had to stop them from using.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Last time I read Nietzsche was Beyond Good and Evil,
Yeah,
the Walter Kaufman edition, and yeah, I've been sort of kind of reflecting on that ever since because again, it was like a series of aphorisms, right? They're not really connected to each other.
right.
But I suppose that the what he was trying to get at is he was trying to move beyond uh he was trying to reach humanity or whatnot, or at least his readers, to a world where good and evil do not have significant meaning.
Hmm.
And to the extent that he succeeded or not, well,
Right.
you can
Well,
only look
yeah. I
around.
mean, I think what you're saying is right, but in the context of the advent of Christianity and its
Yeah,
value system. Of course, he
right.
believed there was an earlier value system. He looked
Yeah,
to the Greeks to this. We know that he had a particular lens
yeah.
about the Greeks, but let's just say there was an earlier time and when good was virtue and strength, and what was good and strong was what was healthy and strong was also good and declared as such. And then you had, of course, the weak and the sick who resented that. And then Christianity, in his view, brought that to the fore. And so he was critiquing, polemically attacking Christianity. In fact, the one I just read, I don't know if it was that the Antichrist. Like it's super polemical. It's one of his very last books, possibly his last book, and it gets a bit hard to take. Um, uh, Genealogy of Morals is really, I think, the best one. These are these essays, but anyway.
Yeah, I think
Um,
yeah. I think beyond after Beyond Good and Evil, that would be, he stopped becoming like readable. Like anything he wrote after that, I think it's just a mess.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and in some ways poetic and but yeah. So, however, yeah, let's just say if needs the suspicion of words. So, yeah, it's a pretty big topic, and I think it's really pertinent to the kind of things I'm talking of, that I was trying to talk about with power. I don't really get into it in my essay, of course. It's not a major work. So just getting back to what I guess what I was trying to do. So we got to theorize power. What makes it work? And then I kind of worked through some examples of stuff, and saying, well, they're kind of getting towards it. Well, what is it? And I finally got to Rudolf Otto and his ideas of this disvaluation of the self. And I love this the way he talks about this. He says you have this encounter with God or any authentic experience of the holy. The human will naturally feel this diminution or disvalued as their self in the face of what is truly great. And that's really interesting on its own. But then what happens from there, and he talks about this. I mean, it's sort of it's certainly my view, but it's also his view. Of course, is that from this this genuine disvaluation and of the self, and of course he does relate this to the sublime. He does talk about the sublime and sense of awe, which is a good thing, using good loosely, because that's kind of reflective of reality. We are limited humans. There is this greater reality, and that's a proper. We should recognize that, and then we have this response. Okay, so then he talks. It's the how does that turn into something else, or does it? And he thinks it does. Then you get sin and this other sense when this genuine disvaluation of self gets attached to acts or events, and so then I take that and I try to work with that in my essay, and I say, well, at some point, there was God, and then God was represented by the tribe and the rituals and the acts. But then at some point, it was just kind of society. And then society was able to say, like, instead of God saying it, it was society saying you're good and you're bad. And this is when it became a form of power, which is really what my thesis, and we've talked about these things before. This is my whole sort of thing. I say that power really is based in morality. And then I try to explain why that is.
Oh yeah. I one thing that I actually find quite valuable in, well, Chomsky is when the what is it, the new atheist movement became
Oh,
really
yeah.
popular. He was quite pertinent in foreseeing that you don't really get rid of religion in society because in the place of, organized religion, there will be the religion of the state. So in his view, there are actually no such thing as an atheist state because there are,
Oh, yeah.
a nation state or a governing body will either govern itself by a transcendent moral code, or it will make up its own code. So,
Yeah.
so that was his view. And when I reflect upon the fact that, how was it Christopher Hitchens, right? He was one of the very prominent new atheists, and he obviously rejected all forms of organized religion, but then he was all in with the, Bush administration's war in Iraq. So he
Oh,
never questioned the
oh,
premise of the war in
yeah.
Iraq, or I believe the war on terror in general.
Yeah.
So I think Hitchens was what Chomsky was alluding to.
Oh, yeah.
And
Right. Well, yeah. I would say Chomsky is definitely on track. I would, generally speaking, agree with that. And then, as you say, how does these other religions? Now, what Chomsky probably wouldn't say, what I would put in is that it's because the genuine movement to find out what is greater than what you can't suppress, you can't get rid of it. It's not just like information. It's like, oh, we have God information, we'll get rid of that. Well, there'll be another narrative. I would just say it's the impulse to know what is greater, the religious impulse. You get rid of religion, then that's going to get transferred to something else. And I think that's what we see in the woke left, as they call it. Whether it's transgender or other things, these become religions, and they become, they have ecstasies, they've got their forms of Jesus on the cross, and all of this kind of thing.
Yeah, so it brings back to, your previous idea, which I think we talked about some years ago. You
Yeah.
had an essay which you wanted to submit to Colette, but but yeah, we talked about it, and I believe I
Yes.
featured it in the show notes or something.
Yes.
It's called Morality as Power or the
Right.
Need to Appear Good.
Yes.
Right. When I reflect on that, it brings me to the contrast between what is like discovered or revealed morality. So something like, I suppose, natural theology or the Ten Commandments. So basically, this morality that humans do not devise on their own, but they either discover it by surveying
Mm,
nature, or is revealed to
mm,
them by a higher being, or the kind of morality that humans do devise on their own. And once you devise your own morals, what's stopping you from, elevating yourself as the highest, moral being, and others to be of a lower moral strata?
absolutely. I mean, and that's totally connected to power, because the person who has all the power is also right. They can't make a mistake, therefore they can't do anything wrong. Um, So that's right. I knew we had talked before, and so basically, the second half of my essay is that essay. Essentially, it's the same ideas, and yeah, because I wanted to explore them more. And in that course, this guy Michael App was the prof. Maybe you know him from, maybe not. He said, whatever you write, I'll read it. Whatever you want to write. So I started with stuff that was from the course, and I did allude to that. I took that stuff out. I edited it out for the essay that you read. But then the rest of it is like the one we talked about before. And so the trick is that I want to differentiate the morality of rules and codes from what I might call an essential morality, which is judgment of person. So I feel like the primary moral act is judgment of person, regardless, not the act, not what they're doing. Now they get conflated because we invariably talk about what people are doing. And then all the rules are made about what you're doing. But while that's all going on, what's really going on, and this is getting back to this power thing, what's really controlling you is judgment of person. And so the real pith of my essay is that judging of good and bad is like a primary and very powerful existential mechanism, let's say, that people respond to because it's just almost intolerable to be judged bad, because it sort of means, okay, you're judged, you're a bad, you're not included, you're not acceptable, you're not lovable. And it's really just almost everything that we really kind of need and want and are afraid that we don't have as humans. And nobody wants to talk about that personally or in life. And so I feel that's what's working. That's this thing about how power works, is it's basically saying, okay, you agree with us, which means you're good, and then all of what that means existentially and emotionally to people. Huh? You're accepted. If you can feel good about yourself, you are loved, whatever how you want to put it. If you don't, you're the outcast, you're untouchable, you're shunned. There's all kinds of terms for it, and that is what controls people. That's my theory.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've had numerous guests on this podcast, and who are, I suppose you would call it like apostates from the LGBT plus
Oh yeah,
ideology.
yeah,
Um, So you have like yeah, I recall that there's like a gay person and the lesbian professor was it Kathleen Stock and
Oh
this is
yeah.
like trans activist Buck Angel is quite popular in the internet right now.
Okay.
They're all like basically cats out and being branded as even worse than heretics by their respective communities because they challenge one of the premises
Oh.
that their tribe hold,
Ah.
which mm, which brings me to the idea of the idea of wanting to be perceived as good and wanting to be uh belong,
Yes.
but the there's a moral sentiment, but then there's also the standard, like being good according to whom, and being belong
Right.
to what, like you.
Well, yeah, I think it's totally relative and it's mutable, and that's why it's a power because it can it's just a matter, it's how do you wield it. If you're able to position yourself or or your group or whatever it is, and then kind of claim this moral high ground or claim the virtuous position, then you have power. I equate the two. I say that is power. And and then people either have to go along with it, whatever it is, whether it's say trans is good, we agree with this, and if you don't go along with it, you're not good, and so people do, or they reject it. Now, in another time and place, let's say like Iraq or somewhere, it would be the opposite. It would be like trans is like evil, will kill you or will beat you senseless, and it's just absolutely unacceptable. And everyone's like, of course, and they go along with that view. And so um, that's sort of so then I have to explore, morality is relative, and some people may not like this because a lot of people want there to be a true morality, with the Ten Commandments or something. And I don't have an issue with groups and society making rules. It's not my fight or my argument. Even I know that's going to happen. It's the it's the force underneath it in terms of how it affects humans. That's my concern. So I personally am not, as I say, a lot of people struggle with that, and they're like, "Oh, there's got to be rules. There has to be somebody that has is true." And being gay is wrong. You know, like a lot of people take the position. It's in the Bible. Being gay, it's wrong. It's an abomination, and um, and so there is this seemingly a need for these rules, which kind of gets back to that language thing. You reject rules, but then on the right, of course, these kind of rules are important, but on the left, they're equally important. It's like as you were just talking about the trans thing, you have to follow, and there's this and that, and you can't dead name or you can't do this, and so my approach would be that to not the rules aren't the area of contention. It's this how are people positioning themselves as controlling this what I call the appearance of good, or controlling what is virtue. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, if you look at our recent thing, we had Stephen Harper was our prime minister. He was conservative, and he managed to get a majority government and did a lot of very good politicking, and he's said to have functioned well, but he really never felt great about the whole thing. He was always defensive, and he got insular and resentful, and then Trudeau comes along, this Justin Trudeau, who's just the son of our famous Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and he's just, look at me, I'm just great. I am great, and I'm doing good things. Everything I say is good. The media is all over it. I voted for him. How did that happen? What, how come Stephen Harper was looked at as bad? He was just looked down upon. Everything he did was wrong. It was, and although, of course, a lot of people voted for him, he was in power for 10 years. Um, but this consensus, and then it all turned to this unqualified, rich, politician with a famous last name was able to turn the entire country into this. And because he brought in all of that, he made gender identity a protected right, which brought in the claim that transgender was an essence, like it was your actual, and everything, the entire woke thing was all on board, and they've been in power now for 10 years, the liberals. So this is the kind of thing that it's like, well, I feel we what a what an inquiry could do or needs to be done in society is to kind of look at that, rather than after the fact and go, oh well, they're putting in these bills and these laws and these are bad. It's like, well, how did it get to the point where whatever they do is acceptable when so much of it isn't?
Yeah, I think another aspect of morality is power, which I think you touch upon is this current trend of the public seemingly holding, how you call it, figures of worldly power. So, politicians and celebrities and etc. as examples of moral goodness or badness. So, again, you've mentioned how the Canadian public, or at least the more left-leaning part of the Canadian public, seems to view Stephen Harper as something not a moral example, but Justin Pierre Trudeau seems to be
Well,
a person of
yeah,
moral example.
yeah. You see, without this, well put, because people really don't talk about it in those moral terms. It's kind of an unarticulated kind of seemingness. It's just this Harper guy. It's just, and then you come up with some words. Oh, he's it could be he's bad or he's evil or he's a goof or he's uptight, and there's a whole range of words that can get plucked out. And with Trudeau is and that everyone makes a joke about that brave and stunning, and there's a bunch of things that people on the right are always joking about because those are little phrases that the left has come up with to describe stuff that's possibly really just trivial or meaningless or not any kind of virtuous example, but because these are these morally approved people or roles or what they've done, then all of a sudden they get these accolades put on them. They've sort of conjured up these terms like brave and stunning, and the right uses it ironically to as sort of a meme level thing. So yeah, so I just feel it is in fact subtle. Yeah, the funny thing is that all the stuff that power is theorized about, the systemic, and subtle forms of control, all this, I'm not really against that. I think those things do go on. I just think they don't actually go the full length and explain how those are going on. They become just vague. It's like systemic violence or systemic racism. And it's like, what actually is going on if this is how power's working? And this is what I'm trying to get at. And I think it is very subtle. And I think most of it operates, I could say unconsciously or pre-verbally, because it's automatic, because it's emotional. If people are presented with something and that is what this good is, and sort of this idea that moral, but good, it just really represents all of this stuff they want emotionally. I want acceptance. I want to be approved. And I really don't want to be disapproved. And so people just will align themselves with whatever that will get them that, or they will try to reject it, which is another necessary part of what I'm talking about. Because, well, this is how I view it works. You've got a lot of people that will go along with the moral narrative, or whoever is able to control good and say they are good, and if you do what we say, you'll be good. So I would say that you can get the majority of people will go along. Then there's a whole bunch of other people that system of good has to reject, because you can't have the good without a bunch of people being bad. You have to have, otherwise not everyone can be good. We have to have those people that are bad that shows how good we are. So there's other people, the undesirables, that it's impossible for them to fit into the current narrative of good. But then you got these other people that actively reject that narrative, and they reject it. Say, I am not buying into what you're saying is good, but then that puts you in the stance of kind of being bad, you know? You're either resentful or because you start playing that role. It's like, oh, you're those things are all clearly defined in society as good or understood to be good, and I'm against them. And so then this is the big problem, is to critique this control of good, you end up falling into actually being bad. You know, it's kind of a self fulfilling prophecy. So that's again part of my thesis.
Hmm. Oh yeah. When obviously I'm living in a country that was used to be, a communist satellite state, and
Yeah.
I read like bits and pieces of Hungarian history, and when you read into like the 20th century and beyond, when it was a Soviet satellite state, it was a good thing to be, not just a communist, but a state supporting communist.
Right.
But afterwards, because of the regime fell, it was automatically a bad thing to be communist. So the communists
Right.
just give themselves different labels.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, what is bad, has a
Yes.
appearance of being good. So they don't call
Yes.
themselves any other label. So
Oh,
socialist, liberal, etc.,
right.
etc. While
Yeah. Yeah.
while making no real changes to their base ideologies.
Uh-huh.
All of a sudden, the ideology that is deemed bad now has a respectable veneer.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And those things, they have switched, even in the West, not just to a dramatic example like that.
Yeah,
So, yeah. So, appreciate that you brought that up. So just getting back to this Charlie Kirk thing, yes, he was sitting there. And then when this whole thing came up, I thought, oh, well, I just stuck it on somewhere. And it's not like any more than 10 people read it. But I think there is a potential for this to take that extra little step that I think people are they're seeing it. It is everywhere. It's actually one of these hidden in plain sight things. I read so much where it's so much there, but they're just that little extra little thing. And I will tell you, it took me years to work through this because I tried to. I This goes back to when I was with the school board, and of course I was deemed unworthy by the good school board. And it took me years, and I would run through scenarios in my head. And I'd be like, okay, they said this sort of, and this and this, and then it would just all turn to fuzz. I couldn't actually get by it, and that's because it was basically it's just so painful when you have a hegemonic group, a larger group that is claiming the good, and they all feel great. They all congratulate them. They all feel good, and they're saying you're not part of us. You're bad. Like that is sort of an ultimate pain thing, and people like they can't process it, they can't verbalize it, and they'll generally either go along with it or they will resent it and hate it and become reactive and maybe even be do bad things. So it took me a long time to work through this to try to articulate it. And so now when I look and I read stuff, for example, like Jonathan Haidt has that a book about morality. I don't know, I can't remember the title of it. It's he's an interesting guy. And I was like, oh, there's some interesting stuff. But he keeps talking about data and this and that. And then finally, right near the end, on one page, he actually says the things that my whole theory is all about. But he just sort of slips it in. It's just sort of on the side. And I'm saying that's really what it's about. And so I think it's really just right there. And that, maybe this could become something that, anyway, you got some books there.
yeah. I think it's maybe called the moral sense. Yeah, but it was mostly a politics based book. Like it was
Yeah, we got maybe more
researching.
than one. The one I read had a lot of sort of data and him talking about how he is a
Yeah, yeah.
psychologist and
He's a social psychologist.
yeah, and so did have anyhows.
But yeah, I was thinking about the what sort of like happened to Solzhenitsyn, the famous Soviet writer. Yeah,
Yes.
so that was the book that I was
Oh
quoting.
yeah.
So this abridged edition of Gulag Archipelago with Jordan B. Peterson as
Yeah, I
the
got the same book.
author.
I haven't read it.
Um, so. the example came to mind because I think when pages of his writings were smuggled into the U.S., like he's like automatically lauded as a hero.
Right.
But then he delivered this very infamous speech at Harvard. I think it was in 1978, where he basically said that the communist system is bad, but I'm not sure if the United States sort of like free market, freewheeling system
Oh,
is a good alternative. He was
right.
basically branded a villain. Uh, people call him all sorts of things like
Oh,
retrograde and
oh,
superstitious and so on and so on.
oh,
So when the Soviet regime fell, he couldn't wait to go back to Russia.
oh,
So
interesting.
yeah,
Right. That's
obviously he
interesting.
landed.
That puts them in a dilemma where made someone a hero and even a moral hero, and then all of a sudden they don't play along, and you're kind of like, oh, well, I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, so it
Um,
goes to show, the kind of like when you base your, I guess state ideology on a very inconsistent moral framework, but then your mechanism of enforcing the same moral framework is stays the same, but your morality is different. Your
uh-huh.
standards are
Yes.
inconsistent, then
Yeah.
they can be challenging for any individual.
Yeah, yeah. And he was sensitized to it. So that was an
Yeah,
area where he was,
yeah.
yeah. And of course I haven't read that. I read Cancer Ward and yeah, there's some great stuff in there. So um hmm
All right. So finally, what do you hope people would take away from reading this piece?
yeah, well, if people found it and I thought, oh gee, because all of a sudden this thing about this rhetoric of equating violence with nonviolence is come very topical in a critical sense. And for about what 2 weeks, everyone was looking at it, and the left was being contrite, and the right was being very virtuous in their processing, and then that all just went away. I mean, everything's moving
Yeah,
very fast now. All of a sudden, there's a whole new scenario going on now, and the activists have somehow gotten worse, but the right are getting angry, and there's been these accusations of the woke right, and so that moment kind of passed, but you know, I think I possibly set some terms to actually take a position of critique against this whole force of wokeness, where if you're doing something we don't like, you say something we don't like, you're fascist, or we have to stop what you're saying. Or now, right now in the Canadian Parliament, this NDP wants to put a bill to criminalize saying bad things or saying good things about the residential school system. The Indigenous students were, a lot of them, not all by any means, were schooled in these residential schools, and there's a lot of contention. Some people say, well, there's some good things about it. There's a lot of bad things. But now this MP wants a bill criminalizing with prison term potential if you deny that it was all bad or you try to say anything good. And that's, again, so there we go. And so, if you had the tool to be able to say, wait a minute, you're talking about um, a nonviolent moral thing, and we can't punish, that with a jail term because it's actually not a form of violence, because that's perhaps what the illusion is. You're doing something so drastic that you need to be put in jail for it. And so the implication, I think, is that you've essentially committed a violent crime, you know. So maybe if you can bring the argument back and you say, okay, well, what we're debating here is how these claims of good and bad are operating.
yeah, I think that's a good thing to think about. Well, thanks again, James, for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And we did talk before. That's right. I wrote that essay, which is the second part of this essay. But yeah, thank you. It's great.